I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist,
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
and this is When East
Meets West.
Spirituality is something that some people are turned off on. And what I'm going to say is, let's bring it on. What do you think, Nikki?
Hello, Pete. Yes, I'm very into bringing it on because actually, I'll share, I was one of those people once upon a time.
You were afraid of it?
I think I've said this on this podcast before. I had a negative judgment about the word. And I think part of that has to do with growing up in Los Angeles where, there's this sort of, I don't know, I've said before, like a misinterpretation of mindfulness and Eastern practices.
What's the misinterpretation? Is it like a granola crunching type of
Yeah,
thing?
I think it's like that.
Yeah.
And I think there can be, like with anything, people can get rigid about anything that I sort of maybe experienced a judgment of like, this is the right way to be. And that's something that's like a pet peeve of mine that I always think like, there's no one right way to be. Everybody has a right to believe what they want to believe or think what they want to think. And so I didn't understand what that word meant. So I used to be really turned off to it. And once I, of course, got into mindfulness, became a mindfulness practitioner and a yoga practitioner. And I always kind of like to joke that, the stuff gets in, you practice it long enough, it's going to get in. I
sure does.
really realized, I'm a very spiritual person and I've always been a very spiritual person. I didn't understand what it meant.
Well, it's also something that we don't talk about at dinner, right? I mean, it's one of those avoidable conversations like politics, spirituality, religion.
Right.
It's one of those things that can be the hot topic. What is that? Why do people get so charged by these things?
Well, I think part of it is one kind of maybe an experience similar to what I had where they misunderstood or misunderstand what it means. Though I actually think that, it's funny because you mentioned, religion as well. There's a misunderstanding about the differences between spirituality and religion. And so religion, again, no right or wrong. There's many different religions. Religions are more rules-based sometimes, right? It's more organized. And spirituality is something that then doesn't kind of gets swept along with that. Do you know what I'm saying? I think like people think if you're religious, you must be spiritual. And if you're spiritual, you must be religious. And it's like, well, those things don't actually have to go together.
Right. There's not a causation between the two. They could actually be very separate, which I think is something we do in Western psychological science is try and help. And there is research that supports that spirituality, just the sort of overall, the way I look at it is that there's something bigger than us. So that's what I think even in like the 12 steps, which we've referenced, I think the first step is about God. I don't know. First or second step?
Yes, I know. I'm my apologies. I'm not extremely knowledgeable with the 12-step program, but yes, it is about, like a higher power is what they say, like giving yourself over to a higher power. Right. So that could be the word God, right? For some people like that word. Some people these days say the universe. I often say that,
but I also give people opportunity to say like pencil,
right?
Or
sure.
whatever you want it to be.
I love that. I would just adore, and I mean this in the least patronizing way. I would love if somebody was like, I refer to, spirit, the universe, pencil. I'd be like, that is amazing. That's awesome.
Because everything is a thing. And I think that's where my spirituality has come from my Zen work, is that everything's a thing and nothing is everything. So like that's the sort of the mind games that we play. We don't play them, but like I sometimes feel that Zen is a mind game because it's about unlearning and unknowing.
Right.
And that's really hard for people. And I think that's the issue with spirituality. It's like the benefits of mindfulness. They're very intangible. To say like parts of your brain are going to change, or you might have improved interpersonal relationships. You can't grab these things. You can't grab spirituality.
Right. And, it's really important what you're saying, because I think what that highlights is this problem that human brains have where we over rely on language and problem solving, and we want evidence and data. And look, especially anyway, patients are listening. Everyone knows I love data. We love data. We're behaviorists, Pete and I, we love facts. We love data. And it's really hard to quantify spirituality, something like spirituality, though, interestingly enough, when I kind of get similar responses to, sort of what you're highlighting, I'll say, look, yes, it is intangible, right? And I'll be like, bear with me. It's also something concrete that if you ask somebody to really think about where they feel something, like people like will say, like, you know what anxiety feels like, you know what joy
Right.
feels like. You can actually identify that in your body when we're connecting with values, spirituality being one of them. You know, most people, like, that is something that you can concretely identify. Like for me, like if you know, you're saying it's something bigger than ourselves, which I experienced that as well. For me, it's also about the connectedness of all things, right?
Yeah.
All beings. And so when I think about that, I feel connection, like in my heart space. Like I feel warm, I feel grounded, I feel like myself. I mean, does that resonate with you?
When I had the opportunity to speak with Deepak Chopra for the Beautiful Mind Summit that Rutgers sponsored, we spoke about consciousness. And I think that that's also related to this, where that's exactly what you're saying, the interconnectedness, you know, this thing that's bigger than us. It's both measurable and abstract.
And also, I just, of course, have to Jewish stage mother jump in and say, it's pretty amazing. Pete got to interview Deepak Chopra. They had an amazing conversation, and I literally videoed it from my phone, like videoing the computer screen, because I was so proud. And it was so special. And it was just, they both, you know, I think you guys had a really interesting conversation about that. Yeah, that
Right.
idea of, I mean, again, we've kind of joked about that before, like, oh man, we're going to start getting into consciousness. Like we're going
Here we
deep
are.
here. It's abstract and concrete. It's both things. And I think,
well, because there are scientists that are studying consciousness and have been for ages. I mean, I don't think you and I are really that abreast to a lot of the research in terms of consciousness. And there are researchers out there all across the globe that have been measuring and looking at consciousness for ages.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing to study, right? And it's a really hard thing to study. So yeah, very similar. If you ask somebody, what's it mean to be conscious? I mean, you'll say like, yeah, I know my experience, and I don't know how to quantify that.
And what it means to be spiritual. You know, I think that's, like you said, I think your experience is one that I think a lot of people will connect with. This sort of turned offness of, am I scapegoating, or am I not fully engaging with a group by saying I'm spiritual? I think a lot of people with really strong religious upbringings or backgrounds feel as though it is negating their own experience. But again, that's where this mindfulness comes in about acceptance. And we're saying, we're accepting other people's perspectives on how they come to wherever they arrive.
Right.
We're non-judgmental about how people arrive to where they are. And hopefully, and I'm sure you've seen this, spirituality makes me a better human being. You know, like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Like
morally.
How?
Yeah. How? Say a little bit
more. Well,
more
morally, right? So like just by having a spiritual identity, I'm able to take perspective on other people's suffering. It's also part of my Zen training to say like, you know what, we're all in this together.
Right.
And there's moments where I'm like, shit, I wish I could get out of this a little bit better.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
Well,
and other moments where
you are a human, Pete. I hate to break it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I get the green pass. Yeah. And I give myself, you know, the green pass to do that. But I think morally, I find that way that spirituality helps me. I think that inner peace, to really be able to accept like failure, to accept a disruption in a relationship, right? Like all of us have struggled at some point with someone that we've had a close relationship with.
Yeah.
But if we grew up with somebody and then we grow our separate ways,
yeah,
spirituality helps me say, in a genuine way, because I think as an adolescent, I said like, I hope you find happiness wherever you go, and I'm sort of like crossing my fingers behind my back.
Right.
But I think spirituality says like, no, I really do. Like, it's okay that we have gone separate ways, and I do hope that you find happiness and peace.
Well, so what's really showing up for me as you're describing that is there's this aspect of turning something over, right? That's actually sort of what we're talking about, like with the 12-step program talks about, like turning over to a higher power. And again, you might not like that phrase, or that phrase might not resonate with you, but this idea of letting go and acknowledging that, you know, we all have our own paths, we all have our own truths, we all have our own experiences, and can we come back and recognize and identify the interconnectedness of all of us, that we all.
Well, let me ask you to go a little further with that, because you also talked about your Jewish grandmother self with me.
Jewish, don't age me here. Jewish mothers.
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. So
I mean, come on, let's
link that with your spiritual development, because I think for some people it's really hard for them to understand how one could be, say, Jewish and spiritual.
Right. Or that identity of spirituality, like, or like more like I would say I would say a lot of people, not everyone, don't want to use absolutes here. A lot of people that identify as religious would
Right.
also identify as spiritual, though I think sometimes people get confused. How can you be spiritual through another lens? And my spirituality has come to me really not, for the most part, not through Judaism, but through more of a Buddhist lens, right? So I
That's
think
right.
that's probably what's confusing to people.
Correct.
So yes, sure. Let me say something. So, and I've also said this before on the podcast, I'm not religious. You know,
Right.
I was raised Reconstructionist, which is a, like even like kind of like a more liberal wing of Reform Judaism.
Mhm.
You know, I had a bat mitzvah. I did practice.
I wish I was there.
Oh,
I would
it was
have.
really. I mean, I had
wish I
some
knew
lots
you
of friends
back
that still
then.
talk about you. It was obviously a very fun. It was a very fun time, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine. But yeah, so I did all those things, but in my family, it was really more about connecting with the cultural identity of being Jewish, and I've often joked with people, though I mean it really in a very true way. I'm in a lot of ways more culturally Californian than I am Jewish. Like I always say, like
Right.
I'm a Californian first, a Jew second, right? So
Right. Yeah.
it's not my dominant identity, I guess.
Yeah.
That being said, I would say the one place where I really felt a connection to spirituality through Judaism is when I went on Birthright, which for those of you that aren't aware is a trip that Jews around the world can take, where we're allowed to go to Israel, you know, for like 10 days. But when I went there and I had that experience of like learning the history and learning different facets of Judaism, it wasn't like I felt more religious. I didn't come back. I felt connected to this like bigger than myself. And also like in Israel, right? Like there are Palestinians, there are Muslims and Christians. It wasn't about like what Judaism specifically was saying. It was about this interconnection. And for me, mindfulness and yoga has been the place where I've been able to really like crack that open in a way where I just, I don't know, I feel more centered. I feel very connected to my values. I don't know. I hope I'm clarifying.
Well,
that
you absolutely
effectively.
do. And I think, and I'm also reminded of, say, Sharon Salzberg, Dan Harris. I think it was in his book, 10% Happier, where he coined Jubu.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a common phrase for
a common phrase with the Jubu, which is, I think, and it's interesting because
Jews who practice Buddhism, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So Jews have found whatever spirituality or religiosity through Buddhism, or the connectedness of the two. And I think there's a lot, some of the top Western Buddhist scholars are culturally or religiously Jewish, so Sharon Salzberg and Dan Harris. I think John Kabat-Zinn too. I don't know. I feel like we should know that.
Yeah, I know. We should.
We should have known that.
I know. Sorry.
Listeners, we need to do our research better.
Yes.
But that's how vulnerable and spontaneous we're being.
That's right. Yeah. Well, then what about you? Because you also weren't raised Buddhist, right? So can you maybe speak a little bit about your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think at times people are still confused. And the reason I asked you to talk about that is I had brought my Zen teacher, who is a Jesuit priest.
Which
I show him, I show him off a lot. I just really impressed. In fact, he called me. I have to call him back today. But in any event, I brought him to speak at my previous institution, which was a Catholic university, and two students, they raised their hands to ask him questions. One of them, who was a little bit more direct and provocative, was like, "How do you have two gods?" And I was like, to that student, I was just like, "Well, this is Father Kennedy, so remember who you're talking to, too.
Right.
Like, have respect."
Right.
Right.
He does have some knowledge in this area.
And
Let's ignore. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that's a common experience for a lot of folks. This idea of how do you have two gods, or what is it like? So for me, there's no commitment ceremony within any kind of studying like you've talked about in terms of Buddhism. I didn't have to I was confirmed, I had baptized, communion, and confirmation, all the way along. I was even a Eucharistic minister at one point, during my high school time, even in college. Yeah. So I find that in any given chapter or moment in my life, religion and spirituality have provided great amount of empowerment, health, and honestly success in a way, because I feel, this is one of the things we talk about. So if I talk about religion for a moment, like Catholic privilege, right? So if we think about power and privilege, for an athlete to hit a home run or to, hit a 3-point winner and do the sign of the cross after and kiss up to God is a non-issue. Everyone's like accepting of that. But what if they, talk about a Quran or if they're wearing a yarmulke, that is then less acceptable.
Right. Well, because I'm glad you're bringing that up, because that speaks to this, again, human problem of getting very attached to there's one right way to be, there's one right perspective,
Right.
there's one right religion or culture or political belief. We can go on and on and on.
That's right.
And spirituality for those of us that connect with a spiritual practice, it helps us to come back to this notion that there is no one universal truth, which Pete and I talk a lot about in terms of, the definition of a dialectic, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's one of the definitions. There's just no one right way to be a person. And,
I mean, other than that, like 1 + 1 = 2, right? Like I think there's going to be somewhere out there.
Well, when I say sure, somebody's writing in like,
there is a universal truth.
Well, we could say like, so I guess I'd want to just, I mean, this is maybe probably a controversial thing to say, but I think maybe there's a difference between facts and truths sometimes, right?
Yeah.
That are, facts are 1 + 1 = 2. The sky is blue, right? The sun, rises in the east.
So those are universal facts.
Yeah, those are universal facts. But truths vary from our experiences and our perspectives, and and that's maybe it would resonate more with people. This notion again of
I think that's important that we just made that distinction. So thank you for that. And
of course,
that was really helpful. I think because I think that's the key to this, right? The key is that there is no one universal truth, and there's no right spirituality.
No, there isn't. No.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's something within us. This spirituality is very, in my opinion, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this, Pete. I think it's very tied to our values. So I've said on this podcast before, our values are our insides, right? Like if you guys could see me, I'm like miming towards my gut, right? We actually feel them in our center and think of, in any religious or spiritual tradition, there's often a discussion about your inner wisdom, your inner peace, your center, right? To me, these things are inextricably tied that I don't know about you. I personally can't pull them apart, that my values are spirituality, spirituality are my values.
That's right. Yeah. Everything's, interconnectedness.
Interconnectedness.
And
everything's
that's the Zen belief there is that, and as I started studying, before I got to Zen, I studied some Tibetan stuff and they really focus in their writings about how everything in the universe is connected. Trees with the water, with the clouds, and if you think about this, that whole cycle. And so that's the human experience, and that's spirituality. And let me just ask us this: are we just defining our own truth and our own spirituality, or have we done a good enough job to think about other sort of perceptions and perspectives of what that might look like?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love to get curious about things. I think it's another dialectic. I think we're predominantly describing our own experiences with it because that's what we have access to, right?
Right.
And I think that we're doing an effective job as psychologists to open up and say like, well, we don't, we can't define it for other people, right? Comes back to there is no one universal truth. So that's the whole point. Like I can't define it for you. You can't define it for me. We can't define it for our listeners. And I think what we're doing here is asking people to be curious and look within oneself and say like, what might that mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of spirituality. So hopefully our listeners today, as you think about this, get curious and think about what spirituality means to you.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.